Welcome back, this is Ian and I am bad at games. Today I wanted to give you my thoughts on the MSI GC30 Wireless Game Controller. Now, but before you go screaming in the comments, this video is not sponsored by MSI. I purchased this controller with my own money. For the past 7 years, I've been using the exact same controller, a wired Xbox 360 controller that I picked up all the way back in 2013. I really liked that controller, and it speaks to its durability since it lasted me this long. But it was time for a replacement. I had tried the Xbox One controller and wasn't terribly impressed. The build quality is outstanding, but my biggest complaint to it comes in the triggers, as I primarily use the controller for racing games. The three things I look for in a controller are the build quality, the comfort, and the axis movement, and that's where the Xbox One controller fell short for me. So how does the GC30 fare? Let's start with the build quality. The controller is much lighter than I expected, considering it includes dual vibration motors and a non-removable battery. The plastics used feel durable enough, and the controller is painted with a textured matte finish that gives it a nice feel. The sides of the controller have rubber pads on it that are supposed to help with grip, although all I found is they just make my hands sweaty. The analog sticks move easy enough, and the hats feel much stronger than the notoriously flimsy ones on the 360 controller. The D-pad is very nice, with a strong tactile bump when pushed. MSI gives you two options for the D-pad, letting you easily swap them out magnetically. As for comfort, like I said, it's lighter than I expected. I like my controllers to have a little bit of weight in them for me to feel like I got a good grip on it. But neither the weight or those rubber pads on the sides are deal breakers for me. All in all, the controller is perfectly acceptable on comfort, and I never experienced any pain or discomfort in my hands or wrists while using it for an extended period of time. But for me, the most important factor in this was the axis movement, particularly in the amount of travel for the triggers. As I mostly use the controller for driving in games, I like a lot of control over how much acceleration or braking I'm applying. The reason I didn't like the Xbox One controller was that I felt that there wasn't enough movement in the triggers. It kind of felt like it was just on or off, and not enough in between. The MSI controller specifically advertised its high-precision triggers for racing games, so let's try out a couple of my favorites and see how it does. First up is Project Cars 2. You'll want to head straight into the settings and configure it as a custom controller. Set the controls for the steering, throttle, and brake, then adjust the dead zones for them. You'll definitely want to give it a test before you do any serious racing, as I found that the steering sensitivity needed a little bit of adjustment to my preference. Once you've nailed down the settings that work for you, I found that the GC30 did an admirable job here. Steering was accurate, not jumpy, and feathering the gas or brake was easy, and I never felt like I was fighting with the controls. Next up is Assetto Corsa, another racing game, but this one is where things start to get a little weird. I've held off talking on this long enough, and it's one of the more confusing parts about using this controller. It has modes. And what I mean by that is the controller has different mode of operations, letting you change between them at any time by holding down the MSI logo button for about 2 seconds. Generally, you'll want to stick to the default mode, where the first two lights are lit up. In this mode, the controller actually presents itself as a Xbox 360 wired controller, even down to the device name. This really confused me at first. But Assetto Corsa doesn't like this. If you load the Xbox 360 controller profile, it'll work as expected, but you can't change any of the button mappings for some reason. If you want to change the mappings, you'll have to switch to the digital mode, where the first and last lights are lit up, and manually configure the controller. But be warned, this can lead to some interesting results. One last driving game, and that's American Truck Simulator, which, like Assetto Corsa, is picky about what mode the controller is in. The game won't recognize that there's any controller even plugged in if it's in the default mode, so you'll want to use either the analog or the Android mode. Both of them work just fine. But unlike Assetto Corsa, in ATS the controller works perfectly, with button mappings and proper sensitivity settings being easily adjusted for a very good fit. Least but not last is a non-racing game. Well, I mean, if you exclude horses, and that's Red Dead Redemption 2. Here, you'll want to use the default mode where it's emulating an Xbox 360 controller. Other than that, there's nothing for you to configure as the game takes care of the rest. Again, the GC30 does a really good job, with great accuracy on the analog sticks.
Buongiorno.
Good morning to you.
When all's said and done, I'm actually quite happy with this controller. Sure, it may take some fiddling with certain lesser quality games, but it does a pretty adequate job meeting my 3 requirements. It definitely has its issues though. I mean, switching between modes is annoying, the aforementioned rubber pads make my hands sweaty, and it makes this weird sound when the rumble motor is on. Take a listen. So if you're in the need of a new controller and you like driving games, I'd first consider looking to buy an authentic Xbox 360 controller. Falling short of that, however, the GC30 will make an adequate stand-in. Thanks for watching.